Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. Little Claus and Big Claus. In a village, there once lived two men who had the same name. They were both called Claus. One of them had 4 horses, but the other had only 1. So, to distinguish them, people called the owner of the 4 horses Great Claus, and he who had only 1, Little Claus. Now we shall hear what happened to them, for this is a true story. Through the whole week, Little Claus was obliged to plow for Great Claus and lend him his 1 horse. And once a week, on a Sunday, Great Claus lent him all his 4 horses. Then how Little Claus would smack his whip over all 5 horses. They were as good as his own on that one day. The sun shone brightly, and the church bells were ringing merrily as the people passed by, dressed in their best clothes, with their prayer books under their arms. They were going to hear the clergyman preach. They looked at Little Claus plowing with his 5 horses, and he was so proud that he smacked his whip and said, "Gee up, my 5 horses." "But you must not say that," said Big Claus, "for only one of them belongs to you." But Little Claus soon forgot what he ought to say, and when anyone passed, he would call out, "Gee up, my 5 horses." "Now, I must beg you not to say that again," said Big Claus, "for if you do, I shall hit your horse on the head, so that he will drop dead on the spot, and there will be an end of him." "I promise you I will not say it any more," said the other. But as soon as people came by, nodding to him and wishing him good day, he became so pleased and thought how grand it looked to have 5 horses plowing in his field that he cried out again, "Gee up, all my horses." "I'll gee up your horses for you," said Big Claus, and seizing a hammer, he struck the 1 horse of Little Claus on the head, and he fell dead instantly. "Oh, now I have no horse at all," said Little Claus, weeping. But after a while he took off the dead horse's skin and hung the hide to dry in the wind. Then he put the dry skin into a bag, and placing it over his shoulder, went out into the next town to sell the horse's skin. He had a very long way to go, and had to pass through a dark, gloomy forest. Presently a storm arose, and he lost his way. And before he discovered the right path, evening came on, and it was still a long way to the town, and too far to return home before night. Near the road stood a large farmhouse. The shutters outside the windows were closed, but lights shone through the crevices at the top. "I might get permission to stay here for the night," thought Little Claus, so he went up to the door and knocked. The farmer's wife opened the door, but when she heard what he wanted, she told him to go away, as her husband would not allow her to admit strangers. "Then I shall be obliged to lie out here," said Little Claus to himself, as the farmer's wife shut the door in his face. Near to the farmhouse stood a large haystack, and between it and the house was a small shed with a thatched roof. "I can lie up there," said Little Claus as he saw the roof. "It will make a famous bed, but I hope the stork will not fly down and bite my legs." For on it stood a living stork, whose nest was in the roof. So Little Claus climbed to the roof of the shed, and while he turned himself to get comfortable, he discovered that the wooden shutters, which were closed, did not reach to the tops of the windows of the farmhouse, so that he could see into a room in which a large table was laid out with wine, roast meat, and a splendid fish. The farmer's wife and the sexton were sitting at the table together, and she filled his glass and helped him plenteously to fish, which appeared to be his favorite dish. If I could only get some, too, thought little Claus. And then, as he stretched his neck towards the window, he spied a large, beautiful pie. Indeed, they had a glorious feast before them. At this moment, he heard someone riding down the road towards the farmhouse. It was the farmer returning home. He was a good man, but still he had a very strange prejudice. He could not bear the sight of a sexton. If one appeared before him, he would put himself in a terrible rage. In consequence of this dislike, the sexton had gone to visit the farmer's wife during her husband's absence from home, and the good woman had placed before him the best she had in the house to eat. When she heard the farmer coming, she was frightened and begged the sexton to hide himself in a large empty chest that stood in the room. He did so, for he knew her husband could not endure the sight of a sexton. The woman then quickly put away the wine and hid all the rest of the nice things in the oven. For if her husband had seen them, he would have asked what they were brought out for. "Oh dear," sighed little Claus from the top of the shed, as he saw all the good things disappear. "Is anyone up there?" asked the farmer, looking up and discovering little Claus. "Why are you lying up there? Come down and come into the house with me." So little Claus came down and told the farmer how he had lost his way and begged for a night's lodging. "All right," said the farmer, "but we must have something to eat first." The woman received them both very kindly, laid the cloth on a large table, and placed before them a dish of porridge. The farmer was very hungry and ate his porridge with a good appetite, but little Claus could not help thinking of the nice roast meat, fish, and pies, which he knew were in the oven. Under the table, at his feet, lay the sack containing the horse's skin, which he intended to sell at the next town. Now little Claus did not relish the porridge at all, so he trod with his foot on the sack under the table, and the dry skin squeaked quite loud. "Hush," said little Claus to his sack, at the same time treading upon it again, till it squeaked louder than before. "Hello, what have you got in your sack?" asked the farmer. "Oh, it is a conjurer," said little Claus, "and he says we need not eat porridge, for he has conjured the oven full of roast meat, fish, and pie." "Wonderful!" cried the farmer, starting up and opening the oven door. And there lay all the nice things hidden by the farmer's wife, but which he supposed had been conjured there by the wizard under the table. The woman dared not say anything, so she placed the things before them, and they both ate of the fish, the meat, and the pastry. Then little Claus trod again upon his sack, and it squeaked as before. "What does he say now?" asked the farmer. "He says," replied little Claus, "that there are 3 bottles of wine for us, standing in the corner by the oven." So the woman was obliged to bring out the wine also, which she had hidden, and the farmer drank it till he became quite merry. He would have liked such a conjurer as little Claus carried in his sack. "Could he conjure up the evil one?" asked the farmer. "I should like to see him now, while I am so merry." "Oh, yes," replied little Claus. "My conjurer can do anything I ask him, can you not?" he asked, treading at the same time on the sack till it squeaked. "Do you hear? He answers yes, but he fears that we shall not like to look at him. Oh, I am not afraid. What will he be like? Well, he is very much like a sexton. Ha, said the farmer. Then he must be ugly. Do you know I cannot endure the sight of a sexton? However, that doesn't matter. I shall know who it is, so I shall not mind. Now then, I have got up my courage, but don't let him come too near me. Stop, I must ask the conjurer, said little Claus. So he trod on the bag and stooped his ear down to listen. What does he say? He says that you must go and open that large chest which stands in the corner, and you will see the evil one crouching down inside, but you must hold the lid firmly, that he may not slip out. Will you come and help me hold it? Said the farmer, going towards the chest in which his wife had hidden the sexton, who now lay inside, very much frightened. The farmer opened the lid a very little way and peeped in. Oh, cried he, springing backwards, I saw him, and he is exactly like our sexton. How dreadful it is. So after that he was obliged to drink again, and they sat and drank till far into the night. You must sell your conjurer to me, said the farmer. Ask as much as you like, I will pay it. Indeed, I would give you directly a whole bushel of gold. No, indeed I cannot, said little Claus. Only think how much profit I could make out of this conjurer. Yeah, but I should like to have him, said the fanner, still continuing his entreaties. Well, said little Claus at length, you have been so good as to give me a night's lodging. I will not refuse you. You shall have the conjurer for a bushel of money, but I will have quite full measure. So you shall, said the farmer, but you must take away the chest as well. I would not have it in the house another hour. There is no knowing if he may not be still there. So little Claus gave the farmer the sack containing the dried horse's skin, and received in exchange a bushel of money full measure. The farmer also gave him a wheelbarrow on which to carry away the chest and the gold. Farewell, said little Claus, as he went off with his money and the great chest, in which the sexton lay still concealed. On one side of the forest was a broad, deep river. The water flowed so rapidly that very few were able to swim against the stream. A new bridge had lately been built across it, and in the middle of this bridge little Claus stopped and said, loud enough to be heard by the sexton, Now, what shall I do with this stupid chest? It is as heavy as if it were full of stones. I shall be tired if I roll it any farther, so I may as well throw it in the river. If it swims after me to my house, well and good, and if not, it will not much matter. So he seized the chest in his hand and lifted it up a little, as if he were going to throw it into the water. No, leave it alone, cried the sexton from within the chest. Let me out first. Oh, exclaimed little Claus, pretending to be frightened. He is in there still, is he? I must throw him into the river that he may be drowned. Oh no, cried the sexton. I will give you a whole bushel full of money if you will let me go. Why, that is another matter, said little Claus, opening the chest. The sexton crept out, pushed the empty chest into the water, and went to his house. Then he measured out a whole bushel full of gold for little Claus, who had already received one from the farmer, so that now he had a barrow full. I have been well paid for my horse, said he to himself when he reached home, entered his own room, and emptied all his money into a heap on the floor. How vexed Great Claus will be when he finds out how rich I have become all through my one horse, but I shall not tell him exactly how it all happened. Then he sent a boy to Great Claus to borrow a bushel measure. What can he want it for? thought Great Claus. So he smeared the bottom of the measure with tar, that some of whatever was put into it might stick there and remain. And so it happened, for when the measure returned, 3 new silver florins were sticking to it. "What does this mean?" said Great Claus. So he ran off directly to Little Claus and asked, "Where did you get so much money?" "Oh, for my horse's skin. I sold it yesterday." "It was certainly well paid for then," said Great Claus, and he ran home to his house, seized a hatchet, and knocked all his 4 horses on the head, flayed off their skins, and took them to the town to sell. "Skins, skins, who'll buy skins?" he cried as he went through the streets. All the shoemakers and tanners came running and asked how much he wanted for them. "A bushel of money for each," replied Great Claus. "Are you mad?" they all cried. "Do you think we have money to spend by the bushel?" "Skins, skins," he cried again. "Who'll buy skins?" But to all who inquired the price, his answer was, "A bushel of money." "Ben, he is making fools of us," said they all. Then the shoemakers took their straps, and the tanners their leather aprons, and began to beat Great Claus. "Skins, skins," they cried, mocking him. "Yes, we'll mark your skin for you, till it is black and blue. Out of the town with him," said they. And Great Claus was obliged to run as fast as he could. He had never before been so thoroughly beaten. "Ah," said he as he came to his house, "Little Claus shall pay me for this. I will beat him to death." Meanwhile, the old grandmother of Little Claus died. She had been cross, unkind, and really spiteful to him. But he was very sorry, and took the dead woman and laid her in his warm bed to see if he could bring her to life again. There he determined that she should lie the whole night, while he seated himself in a chair in a corner of the room, as he had often done before. During the night, as he sat there, the door opened, and in came Great Claus with a hatchet. He knew well where Little Claus's bed stood, so he went right up to it and struck the old grandmother on the head, thinking it must be Little Claus. "There," cried he, "now you cannot make a fool of me again." And then he went home. "That is a very wicked man," thought Little Claus. "He meant to kill me. It is a good thing for my old grandmother that she was already dead, or he would have taken her life." Then he dressed his old grandmother in her best clothes, borrowed a horse of his neighbor, and harnessed it to a cart. Then he placed the old woman on the back seat, so that she might not fall out as he drove, and rode away through the wood. By sunrise they reached a large inn, where Little Claus stopped and went to get something to eat. The landlord was a rich man, and a good man too, but as passionate as if he had been made of pepper and snuff. "Good morning," said he to Little Claus. "You are come betimes today." "Yes," said Little Claus. "I am going to the town with my old grandmother. She is sitting at the back of the wagon, but I cannot bring her into the room. Will you take her a glass of mead? But you must speak very loud, for she cannot hear well." "Yes, certainly I will," replied the landlord, and pouring out a glass of mead, he carried it out to the dead grandmother, who sat upright in the cart. "Here is a glass of mead from your grandson," said the landlord. The dead woman did not answer a word, but sat quite still. "Do you not hear?" cried the landlord as loud as he could. "Here is a glass of mead from your grandson." Again and again he bawled it out, but as she did not stir, he flew into a passion and threw the glass of mead in her face. It struck her on the nose, and she fell backwards out of the cart, for she was only seated there, not tied in. "Hello," Lan cried Little Claus, rushing out of the door and seizing hold of the landlord by the throat. "You have killed my grandmother. See, here is a great hole in her forehead." "Oh, how unfortunate," said the landlord, wringing his hands. "This all comes of my fiery temper. Dear Little Claus, I will give you a bushel of money. I will bury your grandmother as if she were my own. Only keep silent, or else they will cut off my head, and that would be disagreeable." So it happened that Little Claus received another bushel of money, and the landlord buried his old grandmother as if she had been his own. When Little Claus reached home again, he immediately sent a boy to Great Claus, requesting him to lend him a bushel measure. "How is this?" thought Great Claus. "Did I not kill him? I must go and see for myself." So he went to Little Claus and took the bushel measure with him. "How did you get all this money?" asked Great Claus, staring with wide-open eyes at his neighbor's treasures. "You killed my grandmother instead of me," said Little Claus, "so I have sold her for a bushel of money." "That is a good price at all events," said Great Claus. So he went home, took a hatchet, and killed his old grandmother with one blow. Then he placed her on a cart and drove into the town to the apothecary and asked him if he would buy a dead body. "Whose is it, and where did you get it?" asked the apothecary. "It is my grandmother," he replied. "I killed her with a blow, that I might get a bushel of money for her." "Heaven preserve us," cried the apothecary. "You are out of your mind. Don't say such things, or you will lose your head." And then he talked to him seriously about the wicked deed he had done, and told him that such a wicked man would surely be punished. Great Claus got so frightened that he rushed out of the surgery, jumped into the cart, whipped up his horses, and drove home quickly. The apothecary and all the people thought him mad, and let him drive where he liked. "You shall pay for this," said Great Claus as soon as he got into the high road. "That you shall, Little Claus." So as soon as he reached home, he took the largest sack he could find and went over to Little Claus. "You have played me another trick," said he. "First, I killed all my horses, and then my old grandmother, and it is all your fault, but you shall not make a fool of me any more." So he laid hold of Little Claus round the body and pushed him into the sack, which he took on his shoulders, saying, "Now I'm going to drown you in the river." He had a long way to go before he reached the river, and Little Claus was not a very light weight to carry. The road led by the church, and as they passed he could hear the organ playing and the people singing beautifully. Great Claus put down the sack close to the church door and thought he might as well go in and hear a psalm before he went any farther. Little Claus could not possibly get out of the sack, and all the people were in church, so in he went. "Oh dear, sighed Little Claus in the sack as he turned and twisted about, but he found he could not loosen the string with which it was tied. Presently, an old cattle driver with snowy hair passed by, carrying a large staff in his hand, with which he drove a large herd of cows and oxen before him. They stumbled against the sack in which lay Little Claus and turned it over. "Oh dear," sighed Little Claus, "I am very young, yet I am soon going to heaven." "And I, poor fellow," said the drover, "I who am so old already cannot get there." "Open the sack," cried Little Claus. "Creep into it instead of me, and you will soon be there." "With all my heart," replied the drover, opening the sack from which sprung Little Claus as quickly as possible. "Will you take care of my cattle?" said the old man as he crept into the bag. Yes, said Little Claus, and he tied up the sack and then walked off with all the cows and oxen. When Great Claus came out of church, he took up the sack and placed it on his shoulders. It appeared to have become lighter, for the old drover was not half so heavy as Little Claus. "How light he seems now," said he. "Ah, it is because I have been to a church." So he walked on to the river, which was deep and broad, and threw the sack containing the old drover into the water, believing it to be Little Claus. "There you may lie," he exclaimed. "You will play me no more tricks now." Then he turned to go home, but when he came to a place where two roads crossed, there was Little Claus driving the cattle. "How is this?" said Great Claus. "Did I not drown you just now?" "Yes," said Little Claus. "You threw me into the river about half an hour ago." "But wherever did you get all these fine beasts?" asked Great Claus. "These beasts are sea cattle," replied Little Claus. "I'll tell you the whole story, and thank you for drowning me. I am above you now. I am really very rich. I was frightened, to be sure, while I lay tied up in the sack, and the wind whistled in my ears when you threw me into the river from the bridge, and I sank to the bottom immediately. But I did not hurt myself, for I fell upon beautifully soft grass which grows down there, and in a moment the sack opened, and the sweetest little maiden came towards me. She had snow-white robes and a wreath of green leaves on her wet hair. She took me by the hand and said, 'So you are come, Little Claus, and here are some cattle for you to begin with. About a mile farther on the road, there is another herd for you.' Then I saw that the river formed a great highway for the people who live in the sea. They were walking and driving here and there from the sea to the land at the spot where the river terminates. The bed of the river was covered with the loveliest flowers and sweet, fresh grass. The fish swam past me as rapidly as the birds do here in the air. How handsome all the people were, and what fine cattle were grazing on the hills and in the valleys. 'But why did you come up again?' said Great Claus. 'If it was all so beautiful down there, I should not have done so.' 'Well,' said Little Claus, 'it was good policy on my part. You heard me say just now that I was told by the sea maiden to go a mile farther on the road, and I should find a whole herd of cattle. By the road, she meant the river, for she could not travel any other way. But I knew the winding of the river and how it bends, sometimes to the right and sometimes to the left, and it seemed a long way. So I chose a shorter one, and by coming up to the land and then driving across the fields back again to the river, I shall save half a mile and get all my cattle more quickly.' 'What a lucky fellow you are!' exclaimed Great Claus. 'Do you think I should get any sea cattle if I went down to the bottom of the river?' 'Yes, I think so,' said Little Claus. 'But I cannot carry you there in a sack. You are too heavy. However, if you will go there first, and then creep into a sack, I will throw you in with the greatest pleasure.' 'Thank you,' said Great Claus. 'But remember, if I do not get any sea cattle down there, I shall come up again and give you a good thrashing.' 'No, now don't be too fierce about it,' said Little Claus as they walked on towards the river. When they approached it, the cattle, who were very thirsty, saw the stream and ran down to drink. 'See what a hurry they are in,' said Little Claus. 'They are longing to get down again.' 'Come, help me, make haste,' said Great Claus, 'or you'll get beaten.' So he crept into a large sack, which had been lying across the back of one of the oxen. 'Put in a stone,' said Great Claus, 'or I may not sink.' 'Oh,' "There's not much fear of that," he replied. Still, he put a large stone into the bag, and then tied it tightly and gave it a push. Plump, in went Great Claus, and immediately sank to the bottom of the river. "I'm afraid he will not find any cattle," said Little Claus, and then he drove his own beasts homewards. By the Almshouse Window, near the old grass-covered rampart that encircles Copenhagen, there stands a large red house. Its bricks are faded with age and weather, yet the windows bloom with life. Rows of balsams, geraniums, and tiny pots of ivy spill over the ledges, greeting the passer-by with soft colors and a faint scent of soil and sunlight. Within, however, the brightness of the flowers is at odds with the rooms they adorn. The walls are bare, the furniture is meager and worn by long use. Poverty has taken root there, but so too has patience and quiet endurance. The building is known as the Wharton Almshouse, a refuge for those who have outlived both fortune and family. At one of those windows leans an old maid. Her hair, once golden perhaps, is now silvered, neatly parted beneath a small lace cap. She plucks a withered leaf from her balsam and lets it fall. Her gaze drifts outward to the green rampart, where the grass sways in the sea breeze and where a troop of children are playing in the sun. Their laughter rises like birdsong into the still afternoon air. What is she thinking of, this solitary watcher behind the flowers? A whole drama of life unfolds silently before her. One she knows too well, for it is her own. The children below, how light their spirits are. They tumble and chase one another through the grass, their voices clear as bells. Their cheeks are red as apples, their eyes bright as spring water. Yet their feet are bare, and their garments are patched and thin. Still, they laugh as though the earth were heaven. They dance on that very patch of rampart where, long ago, the ground was said to sink and tremble. For there, so the old tale tells, a playful child was lured with flowers and sweets toward an open grave. When the earth closed again over that tiny form, the soil grew firm, and never since has it yielded. The story whispers through the generations, though few remember it now. The little ones who dance above that quiet grave know nothing of it. Had they known, they might imagine they heard a faint cry beneath their feet, and they might think the morning dew were tears from the child below. Nor do they know of the king, the brave Danish king, who once stood upon that same rampart before the face of his trembling courtiers. With the enemy pressing near, he raised his sword and swore he would hold the city with its citizens, and, if need be, perish there, within his nest. They know nothing of the soldiers who fell upon this ground, nor of the women who from those windows poured boiling water upon white-clad foes hiding in the snow. Time has softened the cries of battle into the laughter of children. Play on, little ones, play on. For life's hours of joy are few, and they pass like the drifting clouds over the city towers. See, among them runs a fair-haired girl, her laughter clear as a bell. Soon the years will come. Yes, those radiant years of youth that shine like a brief summer evening before the dusk of toil and sorrow. The day will come when priestly hands rest upon the heads of the young for confirmation. Then she, too, will walk proudly on the rampart, her white frock fluttering in the wind. Her mother has spent many a night by the dim lamp sewing that dress, not new cloth, but carefully cut down from one long forgotten in a chest. A red shawl, large and too long for her slight frame, is thrown about her shoulders, yet she feels as grand as a princess. Around her, the bells ring from every steeple, and the air smells of budding lilac and spring rain. Her heart is full of innocent dreams and whispered prayers. Oh, how beautiful life seems on the green rampart then. The years roll forward, bearing laughter and tears in equal measure. There are dark days, yes, many, but her heart is brave and her faith steadfast. And there, without knowing quite when or how, she finds a friend. Their paths cross often, as if by chance. Together they walk that same rampart when the days grow long and the air is heavy with the scent of lilacs. They talk of nothing and yet of everything. The city glows golden in the distance. The world seems wide and waiting. The heart is young, and to be young is to believe that joy will last forever. Each spring the same tree stands near the castle of Rosenborg, the first to unfold its tender green buds. Every year new leaves appear, bright and full of life. But the human heart does not renew so easily. Shadows gather there that no sun can wholly dispel. Clouds heavier than the northern mists drift through its chambers. For our maiden, love blooms and fades. Her friend, her heart's chosen one, falls ill and dies. His bridal chamber is a coffin of black wood. She wears no wreath, no veil, only silence and remembrance. And so the seasons pass. The laughter of children continues on the rampart. The lilacs still flower. The bells still ring in springtime. But she, the maiden of the rampart, grows older, quieter. The mirror tells her truth without mercy. Silver hair where gold once gleamed, lines where once were smiles. Her world has narrowed to a small window behind the balsams in the Wharton almshouse. There she sits, day after day, watching the green hill and the playing children. They are as she once was, bright, unburdened, full of dreams. And she, watching them, lives her life again in memory. The white frock, the red shawl, the budding tree, the vow of love that ended in a grave. This is the play of her heart, the silent drama of a life remembered. No audience applauds it, no curtain falls. Yet as the sunlight trembles on the rampart and the laughter of children rises into the air, something eternal lingers there. The cycle of innocence and loss, of joy renewed in others, though ended in oneself. Behind the window, the old maid smiles faintly through her tears. For outside, the children are dancing, dancing upon the green, sunlit rampart, their bare feet light as birds' wings upon the earth that keeps so many secrets. In 1,000 years, yes, in 1,000 years, the thought echoes like prophecy through the corridors of time. People will soar through the heavens, not upon wings of feathers, but on wings of steam and lightning, cleaving the air as easily as ships now glide upon the sea. Across vast oceans they shall pass in a single day, their flying vessels tracing bright lines of fire through the firmament. The young citizens of the New World, restless, daring, and filled with the hunger of discovery, will no longer be confined by the limits of the Atlantic. They shall come as pilgrims to the Old World, to Europe, the cradle of their ancestors, seeking the ghosts of empires long fallen, the ruins of cities that once ruled the earth. They shall come as we once went eastward, to gaze upon the fading glories of Asia, to walk where kings knelt and prophets spoke. In 1,000 years they will come. The Thames will still flow, though its banks will have forgotten London's pride. The Danube and the Rhine will still roll their noble waters toward the sea, whispering of vanished courts and silent cathedrals. Mont Blanc shall rise eternal, its summit crowned with snow as when Caesar dreamed of conquest, and the northern lights will still shimmer above the sleeping lands of the north. But the generations of men, proud, brief, and innumerable, will have turned to dust. The mighty of our moment will rest nameless beneath the very hills they once owned, while above them some future merchant, master of those fields, will sit on a marble bench and gaze across the golden waves of his harvest, unaware that the bones of forgotten kings lie deep beneath his feet. To Europe, cry the young sons and daughters of America, their voices bright with wonder. To the land of our ancestors, the land of monuments, of poetry, of dreams, to Europe. And from the shining platforms of crystal towers, the ships of the air ascend, vast gleaming structures of metal and magnetism, pulsing with invisible power. The voyage is swift, almost instantaneous. Beneath them lies the boundless ocean, dark and gleaming, yet bridged by a silent thread, the electromagnetic wire that unites the continents and has already announced their coming. The coast of Ireland appears first, a green shadow rising from the mist, but the passengers still sleep in their cushioned cabins, rocked gently by the steady hum of machinery. They will not be awakened until the vessel hovers over England, that ancient island, once the heart of the world's dominion. There they will first set foot on European soil, the land of Shakespeare, as the learned call it, or as others say, the land of machines and politics, for even its poetry once marched in iron rhythm. They linger only a day. The travelers of this future age cannot linger long. Time itself has grown too precious. One day for all of England and Scotland, for the castles, the cathedrals, the graves of kings, and the mists that once inspired 1,000 poets. Then onward they fly, descending into the deep undersea tunnel that links Britain to France, the land of Charlemagne and Napoleon, of Molière and Pascal, of countless unnamed geniuses yet to be born. In Paris, still after 1,000 years, the radiant heart of Europe, their voices rise in praise of the heroes, scientists and poets of the future, whose names, unknown to us, shall one day illuminate the world. Onward still, over the country of Columbus, of Cortez, and of Calderon, Spain gleams beneath them like a tapestry of gold and shadow, her valleys blooming, her dark-eyed daughters singing the same old ballads of the Cid and the Alhambra. Then across the azure sea to Italy, once the realm of mighty Rome. But Rome has fallen at last. The Campagna lies deserted, silent under the sun. Only a single fragment of stone remains, pointed out as the last remnant of St. Peter's. Even that, some say, is not authentic, a ruin of a ruin, the memory of a memory. The voyagers pass to Greece, the mother of beauty and thought. They sleep a night in the grand hotel upon Mount Olympus, built where once the gods themselves were said to dwell. In the morning, they write their names upon the marble walls, a modern echo of immortality, and continue eastward to the Bosphorus. There, in the place once called Byzantium, they pause a few hours. The golden domes and minarets have vanished. The legends of the sultans are only stories whispered by old fishermen mending their nets, where once the palaces of the caliphs glittered above the strait. Over the broad Danube they glide, gazing down upon the ruins of mighty cities unknown to us, cities that will one day rise, blaze in glory, and perish before their coming. Sometimes the caravan descends, resting a while upon those future lands, then ascends again, vanishing like a silver cloud in the sky. Below lies Germany, once a lattice of railways and rivers, where Luther's words shook kingdoms, where Goethe sang, and where Mozart reigned in harmony. New names now shine there, unknown to us, but bright in their age. Thinkers, painters, discoverers, who have reforged the soul of Europe. One day is given to see it all, one single day to grasp the labor of 1,000 years. Then northward they turn, to the lands of Ørsted and Linnaeus, to Norway, where the spirits of the ancient heroes still dwell among the fjords, and to Iceland, the island of fire and frost. The geysers no longer erupt. Hekla sleeps in silence, but the rocks still gleam in the eternal surf, steadfast, enduring, crowned forever with legend and song. There is, indeed, much to be seen in Europe, says the young American, closing his travel journal with satisfaction. And we have seen it all of it, in 7 days, precisely as the great traveler of our century advised in his immortal book, How to See All Europe in a Week. He smiles, content and a little weary, as the ship of the air turns westward once more, its silver wings catching the crimson of the setting sun, carrying mankind, still restless, still curious, back across the ocean toward tomorrow. The old gravestone, in a house with a large courtyard, in a provincial town. At that time of the year in which people say the evenings are growing longer, a family circle were gathered together at their old home. A lamp burned on the table, although the weather was mild and warm, and the long curtains hung down before the open windows, and without the moon shone brightly in the dark blue sky. But they were not talking of the moon, but of a large old stone that lay below in the courtyard, not very far from the kitchen door. The maids often laid the clean copper saucepans and kitchen vessels on this stone, that they might dry in the sun, and the children were fond of playing on it. It was, in fact, an old gravestone. Yes, said the master of the house, I believe the stone came from the graveyard of the old church of the convent which was pulled down, and the pulpit, the monuments, and the gravestones sold. My father bought the latter. Most of them were cut in two and used for paving stones, but that one stone was preserved whole and laid in the courtyard. Anyone can see that it is a gravestone, said the eldest of the children. The representation of an hourglass and part of the figure of an angel can still be traced, but the inscription beneath is quite worn out, excepting the name Preben, and a large S close by it, and a little farther down the name of Martha can be easily read, but nothing more, and even that cannot be seen unless it has been raining, or when we have washed the stone. Dear me, how singular! Why, that must be the gravestone of Preben Schwane and his wife. The old man who said this looked old enough to be the grandfather of all present in the room. Yes, he continued, these people were among the last who were buried in the churchyard of the old convent. They were a very worthy old couple. I can remember them well in the days of my boyhood. Everyone knew them, and they were esteemed by all. They were the oldest residents in the town, and people said they possessed a ton of gold. Yet they were always very plainly dressed, in the coarsest stuff, but with linen of the purest whiteness. Preben and Martha were a fine old couple, and when they both sat on the bench, at the top of the steep stone steps, in front of their house, with the branches of the linden tree waving above them, and nodded in a gentle, friendly way to passers-by, It really made one feel quite happy. They were very good to the poor. They fed them and clothed them, and in their benevolence there was judgment as well as true Christianity. The old woman died first. That day is still quite vividly before my eyes. I was a little boy and had accompanied my father to the old man's house. Martha had fallen into the sleep of death just as we arrived there. The corpse lay in a bedroom near to the one in which we sat, and the old man was in great distress and weeping like a child. He spoke to my father and to a few neighbors who were there of how lonely he should feel. Now she was gone, and how good and true she, his dead wife, had been during the number of years that they had passed through life together, and how they had become acquainted and learnt to love each other. I was, as I have said, a boy, and only stood by and listened to what the others said. But it filled me with a strange emotion to listen to the old man, and to watch how the color rose in his cheeks as he spoke of the days of their courtship, of how beautiful she was, and how many little tricks he had been guilty of, that he might meet her. And then he talked of his wedding day, and his eyes brightened, and he seemed to be carried back, by his words, to that joyful time. And yet, there she was, lying in the next room, dead. An old woman, and he was an old man, speaking of the days of hope long passed away. Ah, well, so it is. Then I was but a child, and now I am old as Preben Schwana then was. Time passes away, and all things changed. I can remember quite well the day on which she was buried, and how old Preben walked close behind the coffin. A few years before this time, the old couple had had their gravestone prepared, with an inscription and their names, but not the date. In the evening, the stone was taken to the churchyard and laid on the grave. A year later it was taken up that old Preben might be laid by the side of his wife. They did not leave behind them wealth. They left behind them far less than people had believed they possessed. What there was went to families distantly related to them, of whom, till then, no one had ever heard. The old house, with its balcony of wickerwork, and the bench at the top of the high steps, under the lime tree, was considered by the road inspectors too old and rotten to be left standing. Afterwards, when the same fate befell the convent church, and the graveyard was destroyed, the gravestone of Preben and Martha, like everything else, was sold to whoever would buy it. And so it happened that this stone was not cut in two as many others had been, but now lies in the courtyard below, a scouring block for the maids and a playground for the children. The paved street now passes over the resting place of old Preben and his wife. No one thinks of them any more now. And the old man who had spoken of all this shook his head mournfully and said, "Forgotten. Ah, yes, everything will be forgotten." And then the conversation turned on other matters. But the youngest child in the room, a boy with large, earnest eyes, mounted upon a chair behind the window curtains and looked out into the yard, where the moon was pouring a flood of light on the old gravestone, the stone that had always appeared to him so dull and flat, but which lay there now like a great leaf out of a book of history. All that the boy had heard of old Preben and his wife seemed clearly defined on the stone, and as he gazed on it and glanced at the clear, bright moon shining in the pure air, it was as if the light of God's countenance beamed over his beautiful world. Forgotten. Everything will be forgotten. Ah, still echoed through the room, and in the same moment an invisible spirit whispered to the heart of the boy, Preserve carefully the seed that has been entrusted to thee, that it may grow and thrive. Guard it well. Through thee, my child, shall the obliterated inscription on the old, weather-beaten gravestone go forth to future generations in clear, golden characters. The old pair shall again wander through the streets arm in arm, or sit with their fresh, healthy cheeks on the bench under the lime tree and smile and nod at rich and poor. The seed of this hour shall ripen in the course of years into a beautiful poem. The beautiful and the good are never forgotten. They live always in story or in song. On the way home, oh, what a load Rudy had to carry the next day when he started his return home over the mountains. He had 2 handsome guns, 3 silver cups, and a silver coffee pot. This last would be useful when he set up his own home. But these valuable prizes were not the heaviest burden he had to bear. A still weightier load he had to carry, or did it carry him, across the high mountains. The weather was dismal, gloomy, and rainy. The clouds hung like a mourning veil over the mountain summits and shrouded the shining peaks. The last stroke of the axe had resounded from the woods, and down the side of the mountain rolled the great tree trunks. From the vast heights above, they looked like matchsticks, but were nevertheless as big as masts of ships. The Lucina River murmured its monotonous song. The wind whistled, and the clouds sailed swiftly by. Suddenly there appeared next to Rudy a young girl. He had not noticed her until she was quite near him. She also was planning to cross the mountain. Her eyes had a peculiar power that compelled one to look into them. They were so clear and deep, bottomless. "Do you have a sweetheart?" asked Rudy, whose thoughts were filled with love. "I have none," she laughed, but it seemed as if she were not speaking the truth. "Let us not take the long way around. Let us keep to the left. It is shorter." "Yes, and easier to fall into some crevasse," said Rudy. "You ought to know the route better if you're going to be the guide." "I know the way very well," she said, "and I have my thoughts collected. Your thoughts are down there in the valley, but up here you should think of the Ice Maiden. People say she is not friendly to the human race." "I'm not a bit afraid of her," said Rudy. "She couldn't keep me when I was a child, and she won't catch me now that I'm a grown-up man." Now it became very dark. First rain fell, then snow, and its whiteness was quite blinding. "Give me your hand, and I shall help you climb," said the girl, touching him with her icy fingers. "You help me?" said Rudy. "I don't yet need a woman's help in climbing." Then he walked on away from her quickly. The falling snow thickened about him like a curtain. The wind moaned, and behind him he could hear the girl laughing and singing. It sounded very strange. Surely it must be a specter in the service of the Ice Maiden. Rudy had heard of these things when, as a little boy, he had spent that night on the mountain during his trip across the mountains. The snow no longer fell so thickly, and the clouds lay far below him. He looked back, but there was no one to be seen. He could only hear laughing and jeering that did not seem to come from a human being. When at last he reached the highest part of the mountain, where the path led down into the Rhone Valley, he saw in the clear blue heaven toward Chamonix 2 glittering stars. They shone brightly, and he thought of Babette, of himself, and of his good fortune, and these thoughts made him warm. The visit to the mill. "What grand prizes you have brought home," said his old foster mother, and her strange bird-like eyes sparkled as she twisted her thin, wrinkled neck even more strangely and faster than usual. "You carry good luck with you, Rudy. I must kiss you, my dear boy." Rudy allowed himself to be kissed, but one could read in his face that he did not enjoy this affectionate greeting. "How handsome you are, Rudy," said the old woman. "Oh, stop your flattery." Rudy laughed, but still the compliment pleased him. "I repeat it," said the old woman, "and fortune smiles on you." "Oh, yes, I think you're right there," he said, thinking of Babette. Never before had he longed so for the deep valley. They must have come home by now, he told himself. It's more than 2 days past the day they intended to return. I must go to Beck's. So to Beck's he went, and the miller and his daughter were home. He was received in friendly fashion, and many messages of remembrance were given him from the family at Interlaken. Babette spoke very little. She had become quite silent, but her eyes spoke, and that was enough for Rudy. The miller, who usually had plenty to say, and was accustomed to making jokes and having them laughed at, for he was the rich miller, seemed to prefer listening to Rudy's adventures, hearing him tell of the hardships and risks that the chamois hunters had to undergo on the mountain heights, how they had to crawl along the treacherous snowy cornices on the edges of cliffs, attached to the rocks only by the force of wind and weather, and cross the frail bridges cast by the snowstorms over deep ravines. Rudy looked very handsome, and his eyes flashed as he described the life of a hunter, the cunning of the chamois, and the wonderful leaps they made, the powerful fawn, and the rolling avalanche. He noticed that every new description held the miller's interest more and more, and that he was particularly fascinated by the youth's account of the vulture and the great royal eagle. Not far from there, in Canton Valais, there was an eagle's nest, built cleverly under a projecting platform of rock in the face of a cliff. And in it there was an eaglet, but it was impossible to get at it. A few days before, an Englishman had offered Rudy a whole handful of gold if he would bring him the eaglet alive. "But there is a limit to everything," said Rudy. "You can't get at that eaglet up there. It would be madness to try." As the wine flowed freely, and the conversation flowed just as freely, Rudy thought the evening was much too short, although it was past midnight when he left the miller's house after this, his first visit. For a little while, the lights shone through the windows and through the green branches of the trees, while out from the open skylight on the roof crept the parlor cat, and along the drain pipe the kitchen cat came to meet her. "Is there any news at the mill?" said the parlor cat. "There's some secret love-making in this house. The father doesn't know anything about it yet. Rudy and Babette have been stepping on each other's paws under the table all evening. They trod on me twice, but I didn't mew. That would have aroused suspicion." "Well, I would have mewed," said the kitchen cat. "What would go in the kitchen wouldn't do in the parlor," said the parlor cat. "I certainly would like to know what the miller will say when he hears about this engagement." Yes, what would the miller say? That Rudy also was most anxious to know, and he couldn't make himself wait very long. Before many days had passed, when the omnibus crossed the bridge between Canton Valais and Vaud, Rudy sat in it, with his usual self-confidence and happy thoughts of the favorable answer he would hear that evening. And later that evening, when the omnibus was driving back along the same road, Rudy was sitting in it again, going home, while the parlor cat was running over to the mill with the news. "Look here, you kitchen fellow, the miller knows everything now. The affair has come to a fine end." Rudy came here towards evening, and he and Babette found a great deal to whisper about as they stood in the hallway outside the miller's room. I lay at their feet, but they had neither eyes nor thoughts for me. "I'll go straight to your father," said Rudy. "My proposal is perfectly honorable." "Do you want me to go with you?" said Babette. "To give you courage?" "I have enough courage," said Rudy. "But if you're with me, he'll have to be friendly, whether he likes it or not." So they went in. Rudy stepped hard on my tail. He's awfully clumsy. I mewed, but neither he nor Babette had any ears for me. They opened the door and went in together, and I too. I jumped up on the back of a chair, for I didn't know if Rudy would kick me. But it was the miller who kicked, and what a kick! Out of the door and back up to the mountains and the chamois. Rudy could take care of them, but not of our little Babette. "But what was said?" asked the kitchen cat. "Said? Oh, they said everything that people say when they're wooing. I love her, and she loves me. And if there's milk in the can for one, there's milk in the can for two." "But she's much above you," said the miller. "She sits on heaps of grain, golden grain. As you know, you can't reach up to her." "There's nothing so high that one can't reach it, if one has the will to do it," said Rudy, for he is a determined fellow. "But you said a little while ago that you couldn't reach the eaglet in its nest. Babette is still higher than that." "I'll take them both," said Rudy. "Yes," said the miller. "I'll give her to you when you bring me the eaglet alive." Then he laughed until the tears stood in his eyes. "But now, thank you for your visit, Rudy. Come again tomorrow, then you'll find nobody home. Goodbye, Rudy." Then Babette said farewell, too, as meekly as a little kitten that can't see its mother. "A promise is a promise, and a man's a man," said Rudy. "Don't cry, Babette. I'll bring the eaglet." "I hope you break your neck," said the miller, "and then we'll be spared your visits here." That's what I call kicking him out. Now Rudy's gone, and Babette just sits and cries. But the miller sings German songs he learned in his travels. I'm not going to worry myself about the matter. It wouldn't do any good. "But it would look better if you pretended," said the kitchen cat. The Eagle's Nest. From the mountain path there sounded lively yodeling that meant good humor and gay courage. The yodeler was Rudy. He was going to see his friend Vesinand. "You must help me," he said. "We'll take Ragley with us. I have to capture the eaglet up there on the top of the cliff." "Better try to capture the moon first. That would be about as easy a job," said Vesinand. "I see you're in good spirits." "Yes, I'm thinking about marrying. But now, seriously, you must know how things stand with me." And soon Vesinand and Ragley knew what Rudy wanted. "You're a daring fellow," they said, "but you won't make it. You'll break your neck." "One doesn't fall so long as one doesn't think of it," said Rudy. They set out about midnight with poles, ladders, and ropes. The road led through brushwood and over loose stones, up, always up through the dark night. The water roared below, and the water trickled down from above. Damp clouds swept heavily along. At last, the hunters reached the edge of the precipice, where it was even darker, for the rock walls almost met, and the sky could only be seen through the narrow opening above. Close by was a deep abyss, with the hoarsely roaring water far beneath them. All three sat quite still. They had to await daybreak, for when the parent eagle flew out, they would have to shoot it if they were to have any hopes of capturing the young one. Rudy was as still as if he were a part of the rock on which he was sitting. He held his gun ready. His eyes were fixed steadily on the highest part of the cleft, where the eagle's nest was hidden under the projecting rock. The three hunters had a long time to wait, but at last they suddenly heard high above them a crashing, whirring sound, and the air was darkened by a huge object. Two guns took aim at the enormous eagle the moment it left the nest. A shot blazed out. For an instant, the outspread wings fluttered, and then the bird slowly began to sink. It seemed that with its tremendous size and wing spread, it would fill the whole chasm, and in its fall drag the hunters down with it. The eagle disappeared in the abyss below. The hunters could hear the crashing of trees and bushes crush by the fall of the bird. And now the men began to get busy. 3 of the longest ladders were tied tightly together. They were supposed to reach the last stepping place on the margin of the abyss, but they did not reach far enough, and the perpendicular rock side was smooth as a brick wall on up to where the nest was hidden under the highest projecting rock overhang. After some discussion, they agreed that the only thing to do was to tie 2 more ladders together, let them down into the chasm from above, and attach these to the 3 already raised. With immense difficulty, they dragged the 2 ladders up, binding them with ropes to the top. They were then let out over the rock and hung there, swaying in the air over the bottomless abyss. Rudy was already seated on the lowest rung. It was an icy, cold morning, and the mist was rising heavily from the dark chasm below. Rudy was like a fly sitting on some bit of a straw that a bird, while building its nest, might have dropped on the edge of a tall factory chimney. But the insect could fly if the straw gave way, while Rudy could only break his neck. The wind howled about him, while far below in the abyss, the gushing water roared out from the melting glacier, the palace of the Ice Maiden. He then made the ladder swing to and fro, like the spider swings its body when it wants to catch anything in its slender thread. And when he, for the 4th time, touched the top of the ladders set up from below, he got a good hold on them and bound them together with sure and skillful hands, though they swayed as if they hung on worn-out hinges. The 5 long ladders, which now reached the nest, seemed like a swaying reed, knocking against the perpendicular cliff. And now the most dangerous part of the job was to be done, for he had to climb as a cat climbs. But Rudy could do that, for a cat had taught him. He never noticed the presence of Dizziness, who floated in the air behind him and stretched forth her embracing arms toward him. At last he reached the last step of the highest ladder, and then he found that he was still not high enough even to see into the nest. He would have to use his hands to raise himself up to it. He tried the lowest part of the thick, interwoven branches forming the base of the nest to learn if it was sufficiently strong. Then, having secured a firm hold on a heavy, strong branch, he swung himself up from the ladder until his head and chest were level with the nest. Then there swept over him a horrible stench of carrion, for putrefied lambs, chamois, and birds littered the nest. Dizziness, who had little power over him, blew the poisonous odor into his face to make him faint. While down below, on the dank, foaming waters of the yawning ravine, sat the Ice Maiden herself, with her long, pale green hair, staring at him with eyes as deadly as 2 gun barrels. "Now I will catch you." In a corner of the nest, Rudy could see the eaglet sitting, a big, powerful bird, even though it could not yet fly. Staring straight at it, Rudy somehow held on with one hand, while with the other he cast a noose around the bird. Thus it was captured alive. Its legs were held by the tightened cord, and Rudy flung the noose over his shoulder so that the bird hung a good distance below him. Then he held on to a rope flung out to help him until his toes at last touched the highest rung of the ladder. Hold tightly. Don't be afraid of falling and you won't fall. That was his early training, and Rudy acted on it. He held tightly, climbed down, and believing he couldn't fall, he didn't fall. Then there arose loud and joyous yodeling. He stood safely on the firm, rocky ledge with his eaglet. What news? The parlor cat had to tell. "Here's what you asked for," said Rudy as he entered the miller's house at Beck's and placed a large basket on the floor. When he took the lid off, two yellow eyes, surrounded by dark rings, glared out. Eyes so flashing, so fierce, that they looked as though they would burn or blast anything they saw. The neck was red and downy, the short, strong beak opened to bite. "The eaglet!" cried the miller. Babette screamed and sprang back, but could not tear her eyes from Rudy and the eaglet. "Nothing frightens you," said the miller to Rudy. "And you always keep your word," said Rudy. "Everyone has his principles." "But how did it happen that you didn't break your neck?" asked the miller. "Because I held tightly," said Rudy. "Ah, and so I'm doing now, holding tightly to Babette." "Better wait till you get her," laughed the miller, and Babette knew that was a good sign. "Let's take the eaglet out of the basket. It's horrible to see its eyes glaring. How did you manage to capture it?" And Rudy had to describe his adventure. As he talked, the miller's eyes opened wider and wider. "With your courage and good luck, you could take care of 3 wives," said the miller. Thank you," cried Rudy. "But you won't get Babette just yet," said the miller, slapping the young hunter good-humoredly on the shoulder. "Do you know the latest news at the mill?" said the parlor cat to the kitchen cat. "Rudy has brought us the eaglet and takes Babette in exchange. They have actually kissed each other, and her father saw it. That's as good as an engagement. The old man didn't make any fuss at all. He kept his claws pulled in, took his afternoon nap, and left the 2 of them to sit and spoon. They have so much to tell each other that they won't have finished until Christmas. And they hadn't finished by Christmas either. The wind shook down the yellow leaves. The snow drifted up in the valleys as well as on the high mountains. The Ice Maiden sat in her stately palace, which grew larger during the winter. The cliffs were covered with sleet, and icicles, big and heavy as elephants, hung down. Where in summer the mountain streams poured down, there were now enormous masses of icy tapestry. Fantastic garlands of crystal ice hung over the snow-covered pine trees. Over the deepest valleys, the Ice Maiden rode the howling wind. The carpet of snow spread down as far as Beck's, so she could go there and see Rudy in the house where he spent so much time with Babette. The wedding was to take place the following summer, and their ears often tingled, for their friends often talked about it. Then everything was sunny, and the most beautiful alpine rose bloomed. The lovely, laughing Babette was as charming as the early spring itself, the spring which makes all the birds sing of the summertime and weddings. "How those 2 do sit and drool over each other," said the parlor cat. "I'm tired of their mewing now." The Ice Maiden. Spring has unfolded her fresh, green garlands of walnut and chestnut trees, which burst into bloom, especially in the country extending from the bridge at St. Maurice to Lake Geneva, and along the banks of the Rhone. With wild speed, the river rushes from its sources beneath the green glaciers. The Ice Palace, home of the Ice Maiden, from where she allows herself to be carried on the biting wind up to the highest fields of snow, there to recline on their drifting masses in the warm sunshine. Here she sat and gazed down into the deep valleys below, where she could see human beings busily bustling about like ants on a sunlit stone. "Mental giants, the children of the sun call you," said the Ice Maiden. "You are only vermin, one rolling snowball, and your houses and villages are crushed, wiped out." Then she raised her proud head still higher and stared with death-threatening eyes about and below her. Then from the valley there arose a strange sound. It was the blasting of rocks, the labors of men, the building of roadbeds and tunnels for the coming of the railroad. "They work like moles," she said, "digging passages in the rocks, and therefore are heard these sounds like the reports of guns. If I move my palaces, the noise is stronger than the roar of thunder itself." Then up from the valley there arose thick smoke, moving forward like a fluttering veil, a waving plume. From the locomotive, which on the new railway was drawing a train, carriage linked to carriage, looking like a winding serpent. It shot past with the speed of an arrow. "They think they're the masters down there, these mental giants," said the Ice Maiden. "But the powers of nature are still the real rulers." And she laughed and sang, and it made the valley tremble. "It's an avalanche," the people down there said, but the children of the sun sang still more loudly of the power of mankind's thought. "It commands all. It yokes the wide ocean, levels mountains, fills valleys. The power of thought makes mankind lord over the powers of nature." At that moment, a party of climbers crossed the snowfield where the Ice Maidens sat. They had roped themselves together to form one large body on the slippery ice near the deep abyss. "Vermin," she said, "are you the lords of the powers of nature?" And she turned from them and gazed scornfully into the deep valley, where the railway train was rushing along. "There they sit, those thoughts, but they are in the power of nature's force. I see every one of them. One sits alone like a king, others sit in a group, and half of them are asleep. And when the steam dragon stops, they climb out and go their way. Then the thoughts go out into the world." And she laughed. "There's another avalanche," said the people in the valley. "It won't reach us," said two who sat together in the train. Two minds with but a single thought, as we say. They were Rudy and Babette, and the miller was going with them. "Like baggage," he said. "I'm along with them as sort of extra baggage." "There sit those two," said the Ice Maiden. "Many a chamois have I crushed, millions of alpine flowers have I snapped and broken, leaving no root behind. I destroy them all, thoughts, mental giants. Indeed." Again she laughed. "That's another avalanche," said those down in the valley. The godmother. At Montreux, one of the nearby towns which, with Clarence Bernex and Crin, encircle the northeast shore of Lake Geneva, lived Babette's godmother, the high-born English lady, with her daughters and a young relative. They had been there only a short while, but the miller had already visited them, announced Babette's engagement, and told them about Rudy and the visit to Interlaken and the young eagle. In short, the whole story. It had pleased them greatly, and they felt very kindly toward Rudy and Babette, and even the miller himself. They insisted upon all three of them coming to Montreux, and that's why they went. Babette wanted to see her godmother, and her godmother wanted to see her. At the little village of Villeneuve, at the end of Lake Geneva, lay the steamboat, which, in a voyage of half an hour, went from there to Bernex, a little below Montreux. That coast has often been celebrated by poets in song and story. There, under the walnut trees, beside the deep blue-green lake, Byron sat and wrote his melodious verses about the prisoner in the dark, mountain castle of Chillon. There, where Clarence is reflected amid weeping willows in the clear water, Rousseau wandered, dreaming of his Héloïse. The Rhône River glides beneath the lofty, snow-capped hills of Savoy, and near its mouth here there is a small island, so tiny that from the shore it looks as if it were a ship floating in the water. It is just a patch of rocky ground, which a century before a lady had walled around and covered with earth, where 3 acacia trees were planted, which now overshadowed the whole island. Babette was enchanted with this little spot. To her it was the loveliest place to be seen on the whole trip. She said they ought to land there. They must land there. It would be so charming under those beautiful trees. But the steamer passed by and did not stop until it reached Vernex. The little party passed up among the white, sunlit walls that surrounded the vineyards before the little mountain town of Montreux, where the peasants' cottages are shaded by fig trees, and laurels and cypresses grow in the gardens. Halfway up the mountain was the hotel where the godmother lived. The meeting was very cordial. The godmother was a stout, pleasant-looking woman with a smiling, round face. As a child, she must certainly have resembled one of Raphael's cherubs. It was still an angel's head, but older, with silver-white hair. The daughters were tall and slender, well-dressed and elegant-looking. The young cousin with them, who had enough golden hair and golden whiskers for 3 gentlemen, was dressed in white from head to foot, and promptly began to pay devoted attention to little Babette. Beautifully bound books and music and drawings were on the large table. The balcony door was open, and from the balcony there was a lovely view of the calm lake, so bright and clear that the villages, woods, and snow peaks of Savoy were reflected in it. Rudy, who was generally so lively and gay, found himself very ill at ease. He moved about as if he were walking on peas over a slippery floor. How slowly the time passed. It was like being in a treadmill. And now they had to go out for a walk, and that was just as tiresome. Rudy had to take 2 steps forward and 1 back to keep abreast of the others. They went down to Chillon, the gloomy old castle on the island, to look at dungeons and instruments of torture, rusty chains hanging from rocky walls, stone benches for those condemned to death, trap doors through which the doomed were hurled down onto iron spikes amid the surge. They called it a pleasure to look at these things. It was a dreadful place of execution, elevated by Byron's verse into the world of poetry. But to Rudy, still only a place of execution. He leaned out of one of the great windows and gazed down into the blue-green water and over to the lonely little island with the 3 acacias. How he longed to be there, free from the whole chattering party. But Babette was very happy. She had had a wonderful time, she said later, and the cousin she thought was perfect. Yes, perfectly flippant, said Rudy, and that was the first time he had ever said anything to her that did not please her. The Englishman had given her a little book as souvenir of Chillon. It was Byron's poem, The Prisoner of Chillon, translated into French so that she could read it. The book may be all right, said Rudy, but the finely combed fellow who gave it to you didn't make a hit with me. He looks like a flour sack without any flour, said the miller, laughing at his own wit. Rudy laughed too, and said that he was exactly right. The cousin. When Rudy went to visit the mill a couple of days later, he found the young Englishman there. Babette had just set a plate of boiled trout before him, which she herself had decorated with parsley, to make it look appetizing, no doubt. Rudy thought that was entirely unnecessary. What did he want there? What was his business? To be served and pampered by Babette? Rudy was jealous, and that pleased Babette. It amused her to see revealed all the feelings of his heart, the weak as well as the strong. Love was still an amusement to her, and she played with Rudy's heart. But it must be said that he was still the center of all her thoughts, the dearest and most cherished in the world. Still, the gloomier he looked, the more merrily she laughed at him with her eyes. She would even have kissed the blond Englishman with the golden whiskers if it would have made Rudy rush out in a fury, for it would have shown her how much he loved her. This was not the fair nor the wise thing for little Babette to do, but she was only 19. She had no intention of being unkind to Rudy. Still less did she think how her conduct would appear to the young Englishman, or how light and improper it was for the miller's modest, newly betrothed daughter. Where the road from Bex passes beneath the snow-clad peaks, which in the language of the country are called diablerets, the mill stood near a rushing, grayish-white mountain stream that looked as if it were covered with soap suds. It wasn't that stream that turned the mill wheel, but a smaller one which came tumbling down the rocks on the other side of river. It ran through a reservoir dammed up by stones in the road beneath, and forced itself up with violence and speed into an enclosed wooden basin formed by a wide dam across the rushing river, where it turned the large mill wheel. When the water had piled up behind the dam, it overflowed and made the path so wet and slippery that it was difficult for anyone who wanted to take this short cut to the mill to do so without falling into the water. However, the young Englishman thought he would try it. The Snail and the Rosebush. Around the quiet garden ran a living hedge of hazelnut bushes, their green leaves whispering softly in the wind. Beyond them stretched the meadows, where cows grazed lazily and sheep dotted the distant hills like bits of moving cloud. But in the very heart of the garden, where the sun lingered longest, stood a proud rosebush. Every spring it dressed itself in blossoms, pink and red and white, and filled the air with fragrance. Beneath its branches, on the warm soil, dwelt a snail, who carried not only his house upon his back, but, as he liked to say, his entire world within. "Wait until my time comes," murmured the snail one golden afternoon. "When it does, you'll see wonders beyond mere roses or nuts or milk. I am destined for something greater, something inward, something profound." "I shall look forward to it," said the rosebush kindly, shaking her petals in the breeze. "But may I ask, friend snail, when that time shall be?" "I am in no hurry," replied the snail, withdrawing a little into his spiral home. "You roses are always rushing to bloom, to fade, to begin again. There is no wisdom in haste. Depth requires silence and waiting." And so the seasons turned. The next year, when the air grew soft again, the rosebush was once more covered with buds, and beneath it, in almost the same patch of sunlight, lay the snail. He crept halfway out of his shell, stretched his horns toward the light, then pulled them back in again. "Everything is exactly as before," he said with quiet disdain. "The rosebush blooms, The field hums, the sheep bleat. No progress, no elevation, only repetition. What a dull performance life puts on for those who watch too closely. Summer ripened, autumn came, and frost kissed the last blossoms. The rosebush still offered roses until snow buried its roots. The snail, unimpressed, sank into the earth to sleep. Another year dawned, and again the garden awoke. The rosebush sent up new shoots, the dew shone, and the snail reappeared, brushing soil from his shell. "You are growing old now," said the snail. "Soon your time will be over. You have given the world all you can, roses, roses, and more roses. Has it meant anything? I doubt it. You have done nothing to cultivate your inner being. Surely, if you possessed true depth, you would have created something beyond mere petals. What have you to say for yourself?" "You frighten me," whispered the rosebush. "I have never thought of such things." "Of course you haven't," replied the snail. "You never think at all. You bloom because you must, not because you understand why. Have you ever asked yourself what it means to exist, to blossom, to wither?" "No," said the rosebush softly. "I have only lived. The sun was warm, the air pure. I drank the rain and the dew. I felt life rise within me from the soil and descend upon me from the heavens. Joy overflowed in me, and so I bloomed. That is all I know." The snail gave a slow, superior nod. "You have indeed lived an easy life. Perhaps," said the rosebush, "yet I am thankful for it. And you who think so deeply, surely you will accomplish great things one day, something that will astonish the world." "I have no wish to astonish the world," the snail said coldly. "The world means nothing to me. I turn inward. I seek truth within myself. Let others concern themselves with giving." "But should we not," asked the rosebush gently, "offer what we can to others? I give my roses freely. Some wither, some are treasured. One of my blossoms once lay pressed in a mother's hymn book. Another rested upon a maiden's heart as she dreamed her first dream of love. And once a child kissed my petals in delight. Those moments live within me. They were my purpose." "Purpose," hissed the snail. "Illusion. The world consumes and forgets. Keep your foolish satisfaction. I withdraw from such emptiness. I retire into myself, and there I shall remain. The world is nothing to me." And so he pulled back into his shell and sealed the opening tight. The rosebush sighed softly. "Poor creature," she said. "I cannot hide within myself. I must keep giving, even when the wind tears at my branches. My roses fall, but sometimes they leave behind a memory. And perhaps that is enough." Years slipped quietly by. The rosebush continued to bloom each spring, scattering beauty as naturally as breathing. The snail lay hidden in his shell, wrapped in the pride of his own thoughts, until one day he, too, returned to the earth. The rosebush followed not long after, its roots fading back into the soil. Time passed, and in that same garden, new rose bushes rose from the ground. New snails crept among the leaves. The roses filled the air with fragrance, and the snails, each in his turn, declared, "The world means nothing to me." And so it was, and so it will always be. Shall we read the story once more? We might, but it will never change. For in every garden, the rose will bloom, the snail will withdraw, and the world will continue exactly as before. And Lisbeth, Anne Lisbeth's complexion was like peaches and cream. Her eyes were bright, her teeth shiny white. She was young, gay, and beautiful to look upon. Her steps were light, and her mind was even lighter. What would come of all this? That awful brat, people said about her baby. And indeed he wasn't pretty, so he was left with the ditch digger's wife. Anne Lisbeth went into service in the Count's castle. There she sat in a magnificent room, dressed in silk and velvet. Not a breath of wind was allowed to blow on her, nor anyone to speak a harsh word to her. She was nurse to the Count's child, who was as beloved as a prince, beautiful as an angel. How she loved him! Her own child was provided for in the ditch digger's house, where his wife's temper boiled over more often than her pot. Sometimes the child was left alone all day long and cried, but what nobody hears doesn't bother anyone. He cried himself to sleep, and in sleep there is neither hunger nor thirst. Sleep is such a good invention. Ill weeds grow fast, says the proverb, and Anne Lisbeth's boy did indeed shoot up rapidly. It was as if he had taken root in the ditch digger's household. His mother had paid for his upbringing and considered herself well rid of him. She was a city lady now, was well provided for, and whenever she went out she was beautifully dressed, but she never went to see her son at the ditch digger's. That was too far from the city, and there was no reason for her to go there anyway. The boy was theirs, and now they decided it was time for him to earn his keep. So he found work tending Mads Jensen's red cow. The watchdog at Blegdam Manor sits proudly on top of its house in the sunshine, barking at passers-by, but in rainy weather it lies, warm and dry, inside its kennel. Anne Lisbeth's boy sat at the edge of a ditch in the sunshine, whittling sticks or watching 3 blossoming strawberry plants. He hoped they would soon turn into berries. That was his happiest thought. But the berries never ripened. Through sunshine or showers, he sat there. He was often soaked to the skin, but the cold wind soon dried his clothes on his body. Whenever he went to the farmyard, he received only kicks and cuffs and was called stupid and ugly. He was used to that. Nobody loved him. How did Anne Lisbeth's boy get along? How could he under such circumstances? It was his fate never to be loved. At last he was literally pushed off the earth and sent to sea in a wretched little sailing vessel. Here he took the helm while the skipper drank. A frost-bitten, shabby-looking little boy, and always hungry. One would think he never had enough to eat, and that really was the case. It was late in the autumn, wet, raw, stormy weather, with a wind that cut through the warmest clothing, especially out at sea. A miserable little vessel with one sail drove on before the wind. It had a crew of 2 men, or rather a man and a half, the skipper and his boy. All day the light had been no brighter than twilight. Now it grew still darker, and it was bitterly cold. The skipper brought forth a bottle and a glass, and took a swallow to warm himself up. The top of the glass was whole, but its foot had been broken off, so instead it had a little piece of wood, painted blue, to stand on. A drink is a great comfort, and 2 are even better. The boy was at the helm, holding it with rough, tarred hands, a wretched, shrinking form with unkempt hair. It was the ditch digger's boy, registered in the parish records as the son of Anne Lisbeth. The wind drove the ship hard before it. The sail bellied out before the power of the wind. It was rough and wet everywhere, and it might soon be even worse. Stop! What was that? What crashed? What sprang up? What grasped the little vessel? The boat whirled around. Was it a waterspout or a tidal wave? The boy at the helm screamed, "Lord Jesus, save us!" The vessel had struck on a great rock, and it sank like a waterlogged old shoe in a duck pond, sank with man and mouse. As the saying goes, there were mice on board, but only a man and a half. The skipper and the ditch digger's boy. No one saw it, save the screaming gulls above and the darting fishes beneath, and these hardly saw it clearly, for they fled in terror when the water poured into the doomed vessel. There it lay, scarcely a fathom below the water, and the two were drowned and forgotten. Only the glass was left, for the blue wooden block kept it afloat, and it drifted onto the shore. Where and when? That is of no consequence. That old broken glass had been useful, and had been loved, too, in a way, which Anne Lisbeth's son had never been. However, in the kingdom of heaven no soul shall ever have cause to sigh, never loved. Anne Lisbeth, meanwhile, had been living for several years in a large town. She was addressed as Madam, and always held herself very proudly when she spoke of olden times, of the times when she rode in a carriage and talked with countesses and baronesses, and she talked of her foster child, that sweetest of little angels, and how he had loved her and she had loved him, how they had kissed and caressed each other, for he was her pride and joy. Now he was tall, 14 years old, a bright, beautiful boy. She hadn't seen him since the time she carried him in her arms. For many years she had not been at the Count's castle, which was a long journey away. "But I must find a way to get there some day," said Anne Lisbeth. "I must see my sweet young Count again. He must be missing me and loving me as he did when his angelic little arms clung around my neck, and he said, 'Anne Lise, as sweet as a violin.' Ah, yes, I must make short work of it and see him again." So she made the long trip, partly on foot and partly by wagon. The castle was as magnificent and the gardens as lovely as ever, but the servants were all new to her, and not one of them knew Anne Lisbeth or what she had once meant there. But the Countess would tell them, she thought, and her own boy. How she longed for him. Now Anne Lisbeth was finally here, but they kept her waiting a long time. At last, just before the household went to dinner, she was called in. The Countess spoke to her very courteously and promised that after dinner she should see her beloved boy. So she had to wait for another summons. How tall, thin, and lanky he had grown, but he still had his beautiful eyes and angelic mouth, and he looked straight at her without a word. Certainly he had no recollection of her. He turned to go, but she caught his hand and pressed it to her lips. "All right," he said, "that's enough." And then he left the room. The ungrateful young nobleman, whom she had loved above all on earth, and had made the pride of her life. So, Anne Lisbeth left the castle and made her way homeward along the highway. She was very sorrowful. He had been so cold and strange to her, without a word or thought for her, he whom she had once carried in her arms, night and day, and always had carried in her heart. Then a huge black raven flew down and alighted on the road just in front of her, and croaked again and again. "Oh, what bird of ill omen are you?" she said. As she passed the ditch digger's house, his wife was standing in the doorway, and they spoke to one another. "How robust you look," said the ditch digger's wife. "You are plump and stout. Everything must be going well with you." "Pretty well," replied Anne Lisbeth. "The boat went down with them," said the ditch digger's wife. "Skipper Lars and your boy were both drowned, so that ends that." but I hoped that the boy would have lived to help me out from time to time with a little money. He hasn't cost you anything for a long while, you know. Anne Lisbeth. Drowned, are they? Repeated Anne Lisbeth, and then said nothing more on that subject. Anne Lisbeth was heartsick because the young count wouldn't speak to her, she who loved him so and had taken that long trip to see him. The journey had also been expensive. The pleasure it had brought her was little indeed. But she didn't say a word about it. She wouldn't lighten her mind by talking about it to the ditch digger's wife, who might think she was no longer welcome at the count's castle. While they were talking, the raven again flew screaming over her head. "That ugly black thing," said Anne Lisbeth. "That's the second time it's frightened me today." She had brought some coffee beans and chicory with her. It would be a kindness to the ditch digger's wife to give these to her and share a cup with her. While the old woman went to make the coffee, Anne Lisbeth sat down and soon fell asleep. Strangely enough, she dreamed of one whom she had never seen in her dreams before. Her own child, who in that very house had hungered and wept, who had been kicked about in heat and cold, and who now lay deep below the sea. The good Lord only knew where. She dreamed that even as she sat there waiting for the coffee and smelling the fragrance drifting into her from the kitchen, a shining little angel, beautiful as the young count, stood in the doorway and spoke to her. "The end of the world is come," said the little angel. "Hold fast to me, for you are still my mother. You have an angel in paradise. Hold fast to me." Then he took hold of her, and at that very moment there came a tremendous crash, as though the whole world were bursting into pieces, and as the angel rose in the air, holding her tightly by her sleeves, she felt herself lifted from the ground. But then something heavy clung to her feet and dragged her down. It was as if 100 other women were holding tightly to her, screaming, "If you are to be saved, we must be saved too. Hold fast, hold fast." And then they all clung to her. The weight was too heavy. Rich, ratch. Her sleeves were split, and she fell down in terror, and awoke. Her head was so dizzy she nearly fell off the chair where she was sitting. She could not understand her dream clearly, but she felt it foretold evil for her. They had their coffee and talked for a while. Then Anne Lisbeth walked on to the nearest village, where she was to meet the carrier and drive home with him that evening. But when she got there, the carrier told her he couldn't start until the following evening. She thought it over, what it would cost her to stay there, the length of the distance home, and realized that if she went along the seashore instead of by road, it would be nearly 2 miles shorter. It was clear weather, and the moon was at the full. And so Anne Lisbeth decided to go at once. She could be home the next day. The sun had set. The vesper bells were still ringing. No, it was not the bells, but Peter Ox's frogs croaking in their pond. Soon they too were silent, and then all was still. No bird raised its voice, for all were at rest, and it seemed the owl was not at home. The hush of death settled over forest and shore. She could hear her own footsteps in the sand. No wave disturbed the sea. The deep waters were at peace. Everywhere was silence, silence among the living and the dead. Anne Lisbeth walked on, not thinking of anything in particular, as we say. Yet, though she was not conscious of it, her thoughts were busy within her, as they always are within all of us. They lie asleep inside us, thoughts that have already shaped themselves into action, and thoughts that have never yet stirred. There they lie still, and someday they will come forth. It is written, The labor of righteousness is peace. And again it is written, the wages of sin are death. Much has been said and written that one does not know, or as it was with Lisbeth, does not remember. But such things can appear before one's subconscious self, can come to mind, though one is unaware of it. The germs of vices and virtues are alive deep in our hearts, in yours and mine. They lurk like tiny, invisible seeds. There comes a ray of sunshine or the touch of an evil hand. You turn to the right or to the left, and the little seed quivers into life, puts forth shoots, and pours its life throughout all the veins. Walking in a daydream, one may be unconscious of many painful thoughts, but they have their being within us all the same. Thus Lisbeth walked as if in a daydream, but her thoughts lived within her. From Candlemas to Candlemas, the heart has much written upon it, even the record of the whole year. Many sins are forgotten, sins in word or thought, sins against God or our neighbor or our own conscience. We think not of them, nor did Lisbeth. She had broken no laws of the land. She knew that she was popular, esteemed, even respected. Now, as she walked along the shore, suddenly something made her start and stand still. What was it? Only an old man's hat. Where could that have been washed overboard? She drew closer and looked down at it. Oh, what was that lying over there? She became very frightened, and yet it was nothing but a heap of tangled seaweed. But to her fancy, it had seemed for a moment the body of a man. As she continued on her way, she remembered many stories she had heard as a child about the old superstitious belief in the sea ghost, the ghost of a drowned body that lay still unburied, washed by the tides on the wild seashore. The lifeless body itself could harm no one, but the sea ghost would follow a solitary wanderer, clinging fast to him and demanding to be carried to the churchyard and buried in consecrated ground. "Hold on, hold on," it would cry. And as Lisbeth thought of these words, all at once there came back to her most vividly her dream. How the mothers had clung to her, screaming, "Hold fast, hold on," how the world had split beneath her, how her sleeves had been torn apart, and she had fallen from the grasp of her child, who had tried to hold her up in the hour of doom. Her child, her own flesh and blood, whom she had never loved and scarcely ever thought of, was now lying at the bottom of the sea. Any day his body might be washed ashore, and his ghost might follow her, wailing, hold on, bury me in Christian earth." Panic-stricken by this horrible thought, she ran faster and faster. Terror touched her heart with a cold, clammy finger. She was ready to faint. And as she looked upon the sea, the air grew thicker and thicker. A heavy mist fell over the scene, veiling tree and bush in strange disguises. She turned to seek for the moon behind her, and it was only a pale disk without rays. Then something heavy seemed to drag at her limbs. Hold on, she thought, and when she again turned toward the moon, its white face seemed close beside her, and the mist hung like a shroud over her shoulders. "Hold on, bury me in Christian earth." She could almost hear those words. And then she did hear a sound, so hollow, so hoarse, not the voices of the frogs in the pond, nor the tones of the raven, for neither was nearby. But clearly she heard the dreadful words, "Bury me, bury me." Yes, it must be, the ghost of her own child, who could find no rest for his soul until his body was carried to the churchyard and laid in a Christian grave. To the churchyard she would hurry. That very hour she would dig the grave, and as she turned toward the church, her burden seemed to grow lighter until it disappeared altogether. As soon as she felt that, she started back to follow the short cut to her home. But once more, her limbs sank beneath her, and again the terrible words rang in her ears. Hold on, hold on. Ah, it sounded like the croaking of a frog and like a wailing bird. Bury me, bury me. Cold and clammy was the mist, but still colder and clammier were her hands and face under the touch of fear. A heavy weight again clung to her and seemed to drag her down. Her heart quaked with thoughts and feelings that had never stirred within her before this moment. In our northern countries, a single spring night is often enough to dress the beechwood, and in the morning sunlight it appears in its young, bright foliage. In 1 second, the seed of sin within us may be lifted to the light and unfolded into thoughts, words, and deeds. And thus it is when conscience is awakened. And our Lord awakens it when we least expect it. When there is no way to excuse ourselves, the deed stands open to view, bearing witness against us. Thoughts spring into words, and words ring clearly throughout the world. Then we are horrified to find what we have carried within us, that we have not overcome the evil we have sown in thoughtlessness and pride. The heart hides within itself all vices and virtues, and they grow even in the shallowest ground. Lisbeth, overwhelmed with the realization of her sin, sank to the ground and crept along for some distance. Bury me, bury me, still rang in her ears, and gladly would she have buried herself if the grave could have brought eternal forgetfulness. It was her hour of awakening, and she was full of anguish and horror. Superstition made her blood run hot and cold. Many things of which she had feared to speak came into her mind. There passed before her, silently as a shadowy cloud in the clear moonlight, a vision she had heard of before. It was a glowing chariot of fire, drawn by 4 snorting horses, with fire blazing from their eyes and nostrils. And inside sat a wicked nobleman who more than a century ago had ruled here. Every midnight he rode into his courtyard and right out again. He was not pale like other ghosts. No, his face was as black as burnt coal. As he passed Lisbeth, he nodded and beckoned to her. Hold on, hold on. You may ride in a count's carriage once more and forget your child. She pulled herself together and hastened to the churchyard, but the black crosses and the black ravens mingled before her eyes. The ravens screamed as they had done that morning, but now she could understand what they were saying. I am Mother Raven, I am Mother Raven, said each of them, and Lisbeth knew the name fitted herself well. Maybe she would be changed into a huge black bird like these, and have to cry as they cried if she did not dig the grave. Then she flung herself on the ground and began frantically digging with her hands in the hard earth. She dug till the blood ran from her fingers. Bury me, bury me. Still she heard those words, and every moment she dreaded to hear the cock crow and see the first streak of dawn in the east. For if her task were not completed before daylight, she knew she would be lost. And the cock did crow, and the light appeared in the east, and the grave was only half dug, and behold, an icy hand slid over her head and face down to her heart. A voice seemed to sigh, only half the grave, and a shadowy form drifted past her and down to the bottom of the ocean. Yes, it was indeed the bow sea ghost. And Lisbeth fell fainting to the earth, exhausted and overpowered, and her senses left her. When she came to, it was bright daylight, and two men were lifting her up. She was lying, not in the churchyard, but down on the seashore, where she had been digging a deep hole in the sand, and had cut her fingers on a broken glass, the stem of which was stuck in a wooden block painted blue. Lisbeth was ill. Her conscience had spoken loudly to her that night, and superstitious terror had mingled its voice with the voice of conscience. She had no power to distinguish between them. She was now convinced that she had but half a soul, while the other half had been borne away by her child, away to the bottom of the ocean. And never could she hope for the mercy of God until she again possessed the half-soul that was imprisoned in those deep waters. Lisbeth went home, but she was no longer the same. Her thoughts were like tangled yarn. There was only one thread that she could clearly grasp. Just one idea possessed her, that she must carry the sea ghost to the churchyard and there dig a grave for it. Many a night they missed her from her home and always found her down by the shore, waiting for the sea ghost. So, a whole year passed, and then one night she disappeared, and this time was sought in vain. All of the following day was spent in searching for her. Toward evening, when the parish clerk entered the church to ring the bell for vespers, he found Lisbeth lying before the altar. She had been here ever since dawn. Her strength was nearly gone, but her eyes were bright, and a faint, rosy hue lighted her face. The last sunbeams shone down upon her, streamed over the altar, and glowed on the bright silver clasps of the Bible, open at this text from the prophet Joel. "Rend your heart and not your garments, and turn unto the Lord your God." This was just by chance, said people, as so many things happen by chance. In Lisbeth's face, as the setting sun shone upon it, were peace and grace. Now she was so happy, she said. Now she had won back her soul. During the past night, the spirit of her own child had been with her, and had said, "You dug but half a grave for me, but now for a year and a day you have entombed me in your own heart, and that is the only proper resting place a mother can provide for her child." And then he had returned to her lost half-soul and guided her to the church. "Now I am in God's house," she said, "and only there can one be happy." When the sun had set, the soul of Lisbeth had gone way up from this earth to where there are no fears nor the troubles that we have here, even such as those of Lisbeth. At the uttermost parts of the sea, far beyond the boundaries of ordinary human endeavor, two mighty ships were sent toward the uncharted crown of the world, the North Pole. Their mission was to trace the limits of sea and land, to discern how far the courage and endurance of humankind might press into that silent kingdom of frost and mystery. It was an age of explorers, when the thirst for knowledge burned brighter than the hearths they left behind. A year and a day had passed since their departure. They had sailed through roaring tempests and seas of drifting ice, through fog thick as sleep and winds sharp as glass. Now, winter had returned with relentless sovereignty. The sun, their faithful companion through every voyage, had vanished below the horizon. Night, long, absolute, unbroken, descended like a curtain over the polar world. Weeks would pass before its first faint light would dare to return. The ships were imprisoned in a boundless white plain, frozen fast to the surface of the sea. Around them stretched a wilderness of ice, towering ridges and glittering deserts, sculpted by the hand of the eternal cold. The sailors, resigned to their fate, built huts from packed snow and shaped them like beehives, some large enough for a crew to gather, others so small that only 2 or 3 men could huddle together for warmth. Though surrounded by night, it was no darkness they lived in. The northern lights danced above them in 1,000 shifting hues, crimson, sapphire, emerald, and gold, rippling across the heavens like banners of celestial fire. The snow below caught their colors and reflected them in shimmering brilliance, so that even in the deep of night, the whole frozen land glowed with a radiant twilight that never truly ceased. At the height of that spectral brightness came visitors, figures unlike any they had seen. Natives of the north, wrapped in thick furs, their faces half hidden beneath hoods of animal skin. They rode upon sleds carved from blocks of ice, drawn by sturdy dogs that barked joyfully at the strangers. They carried bundles of pelts, reindeer hides, and seal skins, warm treasures that the sailors gladly traded for iron, knives, and beads. These skins became the sailors' rugs and blankets, soft barriers between their weary bodies and the cruel breath of the Arctic wind. Outside, the air froze one's breath to frost, but inside the snow huts flickered small lamps of whale oil, casting golden halos upon the white, curved walls. In such moments, when silence fell and only the wind howled faintly in the distance, the sailors' thoughts drifted homeward. They imagined the world beyond the ice, the orchards of autumn still glowing with russet and gold, the quiet villages nestled beneath crimson leaves, and the warmth of hearth fires that painted orange light upon cottage windows. It was hard to believe that somewhere far away, children still played in fields, and women gathered harvest fruits beneath the lingering sun. Inside one of the snow huts, 2 sailors lay wrapped in their furs. The younger of the 2 held close a precious keepsake, a small, worn Bible, the gift of his grandmother on the day he had left home. It was his treasure, his talisman, the silent voice of comfort that had followed him from the gentle meadows of his birth to the desolate plains of ice. Each evening he read a passage, and each night he placed the book beneath his head before sleep. From childhood, he had known those words by heart, and one verse above all others dwelt within him like a living fire. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. He whispered those words into the darkness, and they seemed to glow in his mind brighter than the northern lights themselves. Under their power, peace came over him. His eyelids grew heavy, and the pulse of the cold world faded from his hearing. He slept, and in sleep he dreamed. In his dream, he felt that though the body rested, the soul never truly slept. It wandered free, alive with memory and longing. He heard music, faint and distant, songs from his homeland, hymns his grandmother used to hum beside the fire. A soft summer breeze touched his face, carrying the scent of grass and orchard blossoms. Then, slowly, the snowy roof above him grew luminous, transparent as crystal, until he lay beneath a radiance like dawn itself. From that light descended a figure, an angel, vast yet gentle, its wings unfolding like sails of pearl. The angel's face shone with the calm of eternity, and in its eyes was the tender knowledge of every sorrow and every joy the young sailor had ever known. The holy being bent over him, and from the open Bible at his side rose a glow, as if a flower of pure light had blossomed from its pages. The angel's hands extended, and the walls of the snow hut dissolved into mist, thinning like morning fog under sunlight. Suddenly, he stood again in his homeland. Around him stretched green meadows, rolling hills, and red-brown forests bathed in mellow autumn light. The storks' nests were empty now, but apples clung to the branches of wild trees, their skins glimmering with frost. Red rose hips shone in the hedges, and through an open window he heard the familiar whistle of the blackbird in its cage. His heart leapt. It was the very bird he had taught to sing as a boy. And there, just as before, sat his grandmother, her silver hair wrapped in a kerchief, twining chickweed through the cage bars as she always did for him. Near the well stood the blacksmith's daughter, the one whose smile had haunted his memory even amidst the ice. Her cheeks were flushed with the cool air as she drew up water sparkling in the bucket. She waved toward the cottage, and the old grandmother beckoned her inside. Together they read a letter that had just arrived, a letter from the far north, sealed and stamped with a name they loved. It told of peril and courage, of a young sailor who yet lived beneath the protection of God, even in the frozen ends of the earth. They laughed, they cried, their hands trembling with joy. And the sailor, though his body still slept beneath the snows of the Arctic, saw and heard it all. He felt their joy, their tears, their faith. He was both present and afar, embraced by love that distance could not sever. From the letter, his grandmother read aloud the very verse that lay open beside his resting head. Even at the uttermost parts of the sea, his right hand shall hold me fast. At those words, the angel's wings curved downward, folding around him like a soft veil of light. A psalm rose in the air, sung not by mortal voices, but by something eternal, harmonious, serene. The melody flowed through his dream until all sound faded into peace. When the dream ended, darkness returned. The snow hut stood silent once more. The lamp burned low, and frost glittered faintly on the walls. But beneath the sailor's head lay his Bible, and within his heart still dwelt faith and hope. God was with him, and through that faith, his home, his loved ones, and all the warmth of life itself were with him too, even at the uttermost parts of the sea. There is no doubt about it. That was a dreadful affair, said a hen in a distant quarter of the town, shaking her comb with self-importance. A terrible affair indeed, and in a respectable neighborhood too. Such things unsettle one's sleep. I declare, I shall not sit alone upon the roost tonight. It is fortunate that we hens are sociable creatures and may take comfort in one another's company. The other hens gathered close, eyes wide with curiosity, and she began to tell a tale so alarming that the feathers of her audience rose up like a storm about to burst, and the cock upon the perch dropped his proud red comb in horror. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that what she said was true, but to understand how this dreadful event came about, we must go back to the beginning, to another hen roost in another corner of the same town, just as the sun was sinking behind the thatched roofs. The fowls were fluttering up to their perches for the night. Among them was a white hen of short legs but good reputation, known for her punctuality in laying eggs and her modest, well-ordered ways. She was, in short, the model of what a respectable hen ought to be. As she flew up, she gave herself a tidy little peck, just to smooth her plumage, and in doing so, a small feather came loose and drifted down through the twilight. There it goes, she said lightly to herself. "The more I pluck, the lovelier I become." She laughed softly, for she was a cheerful soul and meant nothing by it. Then she settled her head beneath her wing and went to sleep. Now, as it often happens in the world, her nearest neighbor heard her words imperfectly, heard and half understood, as we all must, if we are to live peacefully among others. Yet the words would not leave her mind. After tossing for a while, she turned to the hen beside her and whispered, "Did you hear that? I won't mention names, of course, but there is one among us who intends to pluck out her feathers just to look pretty. If I were a cock, I should despise her." Above the fowl house sat the owl family, father, mother, and 3 solemn little owlets, for they had taken the old rafters as their home. Owls have sharp ears, and they heard every syllable. They rolled their great round eyes, and Mother Owl fluttered her wings in moral agitation. "Don't repeat it to the children," she cried, "but one must keep informed about one's neighbors. There is, I fear, a hen below who has forgotten what befits a decent bird. She is plucking herself bare, feather by feather, and flaunting before the cock." "Prenez garde aux enfants," murmured Father Owl gravely. "The little ones must not hear such wickedness." "True," said Mother Owl, "but it is my duty to tell old Mrs. Owl next door. She is so sensible, and these things must be discussed with prudence." So off she flew through the night. "Ah, too-hoo, too-hoo," she hooted into the neighbor's dovecote. "Have you heard? Have you heard? There's a scandal in the hen yard. A foolish hen has plucked out all her feathers to show herself to the cock. She'll freeze before morning if she hasn't frozen already." Where? Cooed the doves, flapping in confusion. "In the neighbor's yard," said the owl. "I've almost seen it myself. It is shameful to speak of, but alas, true." The doves nodded gravely and cooed down into their own poultry yard. "Something dreadful has happened next door. A hen, perhaps 2, have stripped themselves bare to please the cock. A dangerous vanity. They caught cold and died of fever. Poor things. Wake up, wake up," crowed the cock, jumping to his perch. His eyes were still half closed, but his sense of duty was strong. "3 hens have died of foolish love. They plucked out all their feathers for the cock's sake. A tragic story. I must tell it far and wide." "Let it go farther," screeched the bats in the rafters, delighted at the noise. And from roost to roost, from yard to yard, the tale flew faster than wings could beat. Each telling made it richer, darker, more terrible. By the time it crossed the next street, it had become, "5 hens have plucked themselves to the bone to prove whose love was greatest, and in their jealousy they pecked one another till the blood ran and they all died. To the disgrace of their breed and the ruin of their master. At last the rumor returned to the very coop where it had begun. The white hen, who had only lost a single feather in a moment of cheerful vanity, heard the tale with disgust. "What wicked creatures!" she exclaimed. "Such scandal must not be hidden. I shall see that the matter reaches the papers. The public ought to be warned." And so it was written, printed, and read across the land. 5 hens in one night plucked themselves bare out of vanity and perished from cold. A shocking example of moral decay in our modern poultry yards. The respectable white hen clucked her approval when she read it. "It serves them right," she said. "Society must draw a line somewhere." And thus, from a single feather, there grew 5 hens. each one a little larger, a little wilder, and a little farther from the truth. 5 peas from a pod. There were once 5 little peas nestled snugly within a single green pod. Everything around them was green: the pod, the stalk, even the soft light that filtered through their tender walls. And so, in their small and happy world, they believed that all of creation must surely be green too. And for them, it truly was. The pod swelled in the summer sun, rocking gently on its stem as warm winds brushed the field. The peas within it grew and dreamed, sitting in a straight row like brothers, shoulder to shoulder, content and curious about the life that was theirs. Outside, the sun's golden warmth poured down, while cool drops of rain washed the pod clean and made it glisten like emerald glass. Inside was peace, a soft cradle where light and darkness took turns like faithful watchmen. Days passed, seasons turned, and the peas grew larger, wiser, and more thoughtful. They began to wonder if there might be something beyond the pod, some grander mystery waiting outside their green shell. "Shall we always sit here?" one whispered, his voice round and mellow. "I fear I might grow hard if I stay too long in one place. I feel there must be something beyond, something vast, something calling to us." The others murmured in agreement, though none could truly imagine what lay outside. They only knew the gentle rocking, the hum of bees, and the soft glow that filled their home. Time flowed on. The pod grew older, and one morning the peas awoke to find everything turned yellow. "The whole world is becoming yellow," they said, and since their world had always been what they saw, they were certain it was so. Then came a sharp tug. The pod shuddered. It was plucked from the vine. Human hands carried it away, and soon it lay in the pocket of a jacket among other full, ripe pods. "Now something will happen," the peas whispered. "We shall be opened soon. Now we shall see who among us will go farthest," said the smallest pea, trembling with excitement. "Yes, now the great adventure begins." "Let happen what may," said the biggest, calm and brave. Crack! The pod burst open beneath a child's eager fingers, and 5 shining peas rolled out into the bright sunlight. They sparkled like jade beads in the little boy's hand. "Perfect peas for my pea shooter," he laughed, and in a moment one was fitted into the barrel. "Now I'm flying into the great wide world," cried the first pea joyously. "Catch me if you can." And off it went, vanishing into the sky. "I'm going to the sun itself," shouted the second, proud and bold. "That must be the finest pod of all." Away it flew, its small heart full of daring. 2 others rolled upon the ground, dizzy and uncertain. "We'll lie wherever we land," they decided lazily. Sleep comes easily to peas. But even they were soon scooped up and sent flying after the others. "Let happen what may," said the last pea, humble and quiet. It was shot high and struck an old wooden board beneath a garret window. There, in a tiny crack filled with moss and soft dust, it came to rest. The moss closed gently around it like a green blanket. Forgotten by all but not by heaven, the pea whispered softly, "Let happen what may." In that very garret lived a poor woman, strong of arm, weary of face, yet kind in heart. Each day she went out to scrub stoves, chop wood, and wash clothes, earning just enough to keep a small loaf on the table. In the narrow bed near the window lay her only child, a frail girl pale as moonlight. For a year she had been confined there, too weak to rise, hovering between life and death like a candle flickering in the wind. "My sweet one will soon go to her little sister," the woman often said softly. "God once gave me two, but he took one home. Perhaps he will not let them remain apart for long." Yet still the sick girl lingered, patient and quiet, her eyes calm as still water. One spring morning, when the air was fresh and full of birdsong, the mother opened the window to let in the sun. Light fell across the wooden floor and danced over the blanket. The girl gazed toward the lowest pane and said faintly, "Mother, what is that green thing peeping through the window? It moves when the wind breathes." The woman came closer and smiled in wonder. "Why, it's a little pea plant that has sprouted in the crack outside. Imagine that, child. It has found its way to you. Now you have your own tiny garden." The bed was drawn nearer so the girl could see the bright green leaves trembling in the sun. All that day she watched the little vine, and when evening came, she whispered, "Mother, I think I shall get well. The sun has been so warm, and the pea is growing strong. I shall grow too, and see the sunshine with it." The mother smiled, though she did not truly believe, yet her heart felt lighter. She propped the tender stem with a stick so it would not break in the wind, and tied a string from the windowsill to the frame to guide its climb. Each day it grew higher and greener, as though it heard the girl's prayers. "Look, it has a blossom," cried the woman one morning, and tears shone in her eyes. From that day she believed her child would recover. Indeed, the girl's face grew rosier. She sat up by herself, gazing with bright eyes at her little pea garden. A week later, she could sit for hours, her thin hands folded, her heart swelling with joy. Outside the window bloomed a single delicate flower, pink as dawn. She bent and kissed it, and it seemed to her like a festival. "Our Lord himself planted the pea," said the mother, smiling through tears. "He made it grow to bring hope and healing to my blessed child." And what of the others? The first pea that cried, "Catch me if you can," landed in a rooftop gutter and was swallowed by a pigeon. The two lazy peas shared the same fate. Yet in feeding the birds, they had served a purpose after all. The proud one that boasted it would reach the sun fell too into a gutter, where it soaked in dirty rainwater until it swelled and burst. "I am magnificent," it declared. "No pea has ever grown so large. Surely I have gone farther than all." The gutter, full of filth and vanity, agreed completely, but high above them, at the humble garret window, the fifth pea stood green and strong, crowned with a blossom. Beside it, the once sick girl now stood upright, her cheeks touched with the blush of health, her hands folded in thanksgiving. She looked at the flower as one looks at a small miracle. The world outside still went on with its noise and rain and sorrow, but in that little room there was sunlight, gratitude, and the quiet smile of faith. And in the mossy crack beneath the window, the pea that had whispered, "Let happen what may," had, in its own small way, changed a life.